morning, good afternoon. Welcome. My name is the Reverend Dr. Stephanie M. Crumpton. I'm the Associate Professor of Practical Theology with McCormick Theological Seminary. You have joined us this morning or this afternoon for the second edition of our Trauma Symposium. We will be broadcasting through Zoom every Thursday in April, beginning at 12 p.m., running until about 1:30. Last week, we began our series with talking about COVID and mental health. In today's conversation, we'll be working on, COVID and vulnerable children, caring for vulnerable children in times of distress. Next week, we'll be taking a look at COVID grief and how it is different from regular grief. And on the last Thursday of this month, we will wrap up with a conversation with medical professionals talking about health and immunity. Before we get into our call and our topics today, I'd like to introduce my co-convener, Reverend Dr. Barbara Wilson.
Hello, everyone. I am pleased that all of you have joined us on today. I am the Director of Collaboration and Community Partnerships for the Presbytery of Chicago. So I have the privilege of working with the 80 or so Presbyterian Church USA congregations here in the Chicagoland area. I also know that some of my AME colleagues, African Methodist Episcopal Church colleagues, are on this call as well. So welcome to all of you. This event and this series and what we are doing is a wonderful partnership and collaboration in order to offer informed, practical, and spiritually engaged experiences for us. So welcome. Thank you to our guest presenters, and let's do it.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I'd like to begin by just introducing our three guests today. Our first guest is Dr. Melissa Merrick. She's the president and CEO of Prevent Child Abuse America, the nation's oldest nonprofit organization dedicated to the primary prevention of child abuse and neglect. Our second guest is Mr. Chris Chambliss. He's a community ambassador with Brightside Church Community Outreach, where he works with parents and their children on matters of generational, historical, and vicarious trauma, and how it impacts the children and adults. And our third guest is the Reverend Dr. Carmen A. Frederick James. She is the Associate Pastor to Youth at Covenant United Church of Christ in South Holland, where they are a multi-generational, beloved community connecting cultural affirmation, love of God and neighbor, justice for the poor, and healing for the hurting, and liberation for the oppressed. Thank you so much to our guests for being here with us. You'll notice that if you look at the chat, you'll see the order of how we'll spend our time together. And so we're going to go ahead and begin with Dr. Merrick.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I'm just so delighted to be with all of you today. Stephanie is going to share my slides, so we hope that that won't be too disruptive for those who can see, and we can certainly make these available to you afterwards. So I come to you today, April 16th. We are right in the middle of Child Abuse Prevention Month. So you see many of us in our blue, just recognizing that we can together prevent child abuse and neglect before it occurs. So that's really the primary mission of Prevent Child Abuse America. We are headquartered here in Chicago, and I'm new to Chicago. I moved to Chicago last July from Atlanta, where I had spent about 10 years at the Centers for Disease Control, really running child abuse and neglect prevention activities for our government. So I think the opportunity that we all have here today, and certainly in this time and this moment of our history together, is to really reflect on what we're seeing all around us now, which is true public health in action. And often people ask, or public health can seem a little bit abstract. So here I put a definition that helps ground me about what public health is. It's that what we as a society do collectively to assure the conditions in which all people can be healthy. So it's not what someone does in a particular discipline, or what faith leaders would do in a silo, or what teachers or doctors or public health officials would do. It's all of us together. And we know that as we're sheltering in place to really flatten the curve of this pandemic before us, it won't work unless we all do it collectively. The same is true in preventing childhood adversity for all of our children. We all have a role to play. It's not up to people who are trained as clinicians or psychologists like myself or doctors, but really there's a role for business leaders, for media. We all have a role to play. And so, and again, assuring the conditions. These are not just one-off experiences. We know that there are root causes to all of these types of experiences. And so let me just start by saying the same three criteria are what determine whether a public health issue is a public health issue. It's the prevalence. How many people does it impact? 2, does it impact the health of the public, right? And what is that burden on the public's health? And then 3, are there prevention solutions? So in this problem of violence against children, I will just say all 3 criteria are met. Stephanie, if you go to the next slide, right before that, the 1 billion children experience violence annually. So that is half of all children in this world, okay? Looking at US estimates, we know for child abuse and neglect in particular, so violence against children by a caregiver in the home, we know that at least 1 in 7 children domestically experience child abuse and neglect. And this is even with imperfect data systems. So this is, data based on what's reported to officials, what's investigated by our child protection workers to come up with this number. So obviously we know that a 1 in 7 number is a gross underestimate because so much of child abuse and neglect really is only known by the child and then the perpetrator of that violence, right? But we also very clearly know that in times of acute stress and uncertainty, that really we're in this moment ripe for child abuse and neglect, right? We have financial insecurity for so many of our families and communities. We have that just increased parental stress. Many of us who are fortunate enough to be working at home and also have our kids learning from home, we're trying to bring our best selves to our jobs, to our children, to our communities that are in need. And it's simply, frankly, impossible to bring our best self to every one of those kind of audiences at any given time. So this is a time that's really stressful for parents. And I'm so delighted of to be on this panel with my co-presenters who are going to give us some practical solutions here. But we just have to be clear that in times of natural disasters and trauma, for example, I worked on the Hurricane Maria response for CDC as the mental health subject matter expert. And we saw, again, domestic violence rates increase, suicide rates increase, and child abuse and neglect rates increase during at times of increased stress. So this is something that's really on all of our minds every April, but particularly now as we see public health in action to slow the stem or the spread of this global pandemic. We too understand the burden on our children and families. Next slide. And what I think is so critical is to understand, how trauma, again, even in the best of times, impacts brain development, brain architecture, et cetera, because we know the science is very clear that early experiences, both positive and negative, affect the architecture of the maturing brain, affect how our brain processes happen, affect our immune systems, our immune responses, our endocrine function, and even the way our genes express themselves. So this is just true science. And here you can see a little schematic of these mechanisms. So starting first on that kind of one that says adverse childhood experiences, this is sort of where a lot of our science comes from under this kind of frame of ACEs or adverse childhood experiences, of which child abuse and neglect are 5 of the 10 traditionally studied ACEs. And I served as the lead scientist for CDC on the ACE study for about 7 or 8 years. But we see that repeated over 40 health outcomes to date have these same kind of mechanisms where you experience the early adversity, particularly in the absence of protective factors. So this is not that these things will happen if you experience early adversity like child abuse and neglect, but they're more likely to happen, that you have this disrupted neurodevelopment, which leads to social, emotional, and cognitive impairments, which then really leads to the adoption of health risk behaviors, I would say unhealthy coping strategies, like substance use and misuse, things like that, which then make it more likely to observe in adult populations disease, disability, social problems. Again, 40 plus health outcomes to date, leading causes of death like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancers, all have roots in early adversity. And that leads to, there's a documented 19-year difference in life expectancy between those who have high ACEs, measured 6 or more, versus those who have no ACEs. A 19-year difference in life expectancy is a greater life expectancy inequity than we see in most any other illness, injury, or geographic comparison. That's almost 20 years of life lost. So here I want to situate you to the bottom 2 layers, however, that say there is science that shows that the social conditions and local context, so the environment, really gives rise to ACEs like child abuse and neglect. And if we back up even more, historical trauma. And again, it gets under the skin for generations. If we look at our tribal leaders, they argue that it's 7 generations before us in what we express today in this generation, okay? So all of this is to say these 2 layers, I'm really proud of getting these 2 layers into this graphic, because this graphic used to stop at ACEs, but it really requires us to get at those conditions. Again, a requirement of public health is to assure the conditions in which all people can be healthy. So on the next slide, you can see this kind of diagram that I think is really where this field is moving. And we're late to the game as a field because we've spent decades measuring these leaves that we can observe. So these things like child abuse and neglect, things like growing up in a home with maternal depression or other kinds of mental illness, parental incarceration, things like this. But what if we really got to the roots of this tree, which is really providing the nutrients or lack thereof for what leaves we observe? So it's really, our work is about tackling things like discrimination, income inequality, poor housing quality, lack of affordable housing, all of these things. And we know also that although child abuse and neglect can touch all families and does touch all families, we know that there are certain communities that experience a disproportionate amount of the burden of early adversity. And I would say that that is not because there is something wrong with those people or those communities and, oh, it happens over there, not in my family or my school, but over there to those people. No, it's that there are these structures that have been in place for centuries that keep some groups marginalized and minoritized, and keep others in this kind of privileged stance for health and the achievement of health and life potential. So really, again, if we are about getting to the conditions, getting to the root causes, then we must start looking at those roots of this tree. Next slide. But no matter how we measure it, we know too that we can prevent major public health issues if we have healthier children. I mean, this is science. This was from a vital signs report that I was the lead author for, CDC, that came out in November of last year. This looked at all of these various health conditions, health risk behaviors, socioeconomic challenges. So adult conditions and goals, right? So it doesn't matter if you're in the business of wanting to prevent depressive disorder. If you have healthier kids that do not experience adverse childhood experiences, you can have 44% reduction in adult depression. So almost 21 million less cases of adult depression if you have healthier kids. Again, all of that is about brain development, neurobiological development, and this kind of epigenetic expression. Our leading cause of death in this country, coronary heart disease, could be prevented by 13% if we had healthier kids that did not experience early adversity. Almost 2 million less cases of the leading cause of death. And then you can see similar health impacts or health risk behaviors like smoking, heavy drinking, and then various socioeconomic challenges. We can have 15% reduction in adult unemployment if we had healthier kids that have brains that are ready to learn, ready to take in the information, etc., if they do not experience things like child abuse and neglect. Next slide. So then what we're really talking about, and what it's so wonderful to have almost 100 plus participants on this phone call today, is what our collective role then can be at replacing those roots. What if the roots now, instead of income inequality, housing instability, what if it was things like therapy, faith, empowerment, jobs, safe communities, supportive context? What would be the leaves that we would be able to observe? We would be able to observe love and health and trust, self-esteem. We would have resilient communities that can overcome, because again, early adversity like child abuse and neglect, even in this time of acute stress in our families and in our communities, the fear that this moment is giving rise to, but the increase in just parental stress, we can overcome, we can prevent child abuse and neglect if we come together in this collective public health framework. We can have resilient communities, resilient children that can be stronger despite this increase in stress and uncertainty in families and communities' lives. Next slide. This is just to suggest that I think a main idea here in this moment is that we cannot allow, and to use the words of the Surgeon General, we cannot allow social distancing to equate to social disconnectivity or disengagement. Physical distancing while staying socially and emotionally connected is more important than ever for the health of our families, but particularly for the health of our children. We know that social and emotional relationships, connectivity is protective of kids. It's also protective for their parents' mental health and well-being, to help them be more responsive and present with their children. Again, we're going to hear some practical tips from my co-presenters today, but we at Prevent Child Abuse America have also developed a coronavirus resource page, and you see the link right there. And then preventchildabuse.org/yesyou talks about the role that we all have in preventing child abuse and neglect this Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Month and year-round. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hand it back over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for an amazing presentation, so informative. Some of the key highlights essentially are thinking about COVID as a burden and a stressor to parents, the importance of maintaining physical distance, but staying socially and emotionally connected, and also the possibility of recognizing that communities are huge sources of resilience. Thank you so much for those pieces. We'll make sure to include her slides, make them accessible when we post the entire video. Thank you so much, Dr. Melissa Merrick with Prevent Child Abuse America. One of the important pieces that Melissa mentioned here is the, first of all, having a framework for understanding what's happening with our children and the possibilities, the very real possibilities of child abuse. But equally important is also strategies, right? Are also strategies and tactics around staying connected and supporting parents in this particularly, parents and guardians in this particularly stressful time. And for that, we'll turn to Chris Chambliss, who will talk about a bit about that and also his work in general. Thank you so much.
Yes, good morning, Dr. Stephanie, and thank you, Melissa, Dr. Melissa, for your profound insight into your work and what you do. I'm totally grateful for the opportunity to be a part of the symposium and to be on such an esteemed panel, those that are with us here this afternoon. I currently work for the Bright Star Community Outreach, where we're located in the Bronzeville area of Chicago. And what we endeavor to do is to really get into the grassroots of what our community and the needs of our community are. We've been in the South Side Chicago on this programming for 11 years. And we then opened up our behavioral health division, where I am a part of, and I work as an advocate as well as an ambassador, which is a dual role. So the advocate piece is where I am a part of a helpline that helps folks walk through there and provide emotional support through their trauma, for whatever the trauma is. as well as the ambassador piece. The ambassador piece is where I'm in the communities, I'm in community centers, I'm in churches, I'm in other organizations where I can sit with those folks and be with them through their experiences and their traumatic experiences, and allow for conversations that they may be experiencing and having. For example, I have opportunities to be in an organization in Inglewood, in a social service organization, where we've been asked to come in and sit with parents and walk out with parents some of the things that they've been experiencing in their traumatic experiences, whatever they are, and just to hear and to see the pain, to see some of the traumas that their experiences are really enlightening. And so I was able to take a step back and to be able to look at my own humanity and what it is that I have to offer them. And what I discovered that I've been able to offer them is my listening ear and my compassion. And I believe as human beings, if we have that opportunity to become more compassionate outside of ourselves, look beyond our own scope of view, and see those that are really in need of what we have to offer. And what I was able to discover in this capacity was that people sometimes don't know what their trauma is. Sometimes they don't know what their historical trauma is. Sometimes they don't know what their generational trauma is. And so they begin to repeat these traumas that have been imposed upon them. And now they have children. And so now they're repeating the cycle. And so we talk about these things of how to stop the cycle of repeating these things that we don't know. And if we don't know our history, how can we know what our future is going to look like? Oftentimes I talk to folks in these environments, and I says, how many of y'all remember what it was like for you to be in the kitchen of your mother? Well, I wasn't invited in there, right? So what was it like when you were cooking that meatloaf in that small pan, and what did that look like? Well, that's all the size that grandma had. But those are just some of the examples that we kind of walk through these. Why do they look the way they look? And we open that up, and we only have 2 hours, and it's twice a month. And we just kind of really open this up and what that looks like, and the possibility of what lies ahead of them. Their children's what lies ahead of them. We talk about communication. We talk about verbal and nonverbal communications. I heard a story once before where there was a woman that told her story. She says, I learned so much. I learned about life from the backseat of a car. Well, when I read that, I was amazed, right? We think learn from the backseat of a car. But she learned life from her mother and father, talking about life in the front seat and the experiences that they had, the encounters that they had, some of the stories that they had. And as I began to read on in the story, I said, wow, experiencing life from the back seat. Because as a pastor's son, that was part of my story, experiencing from the back seat on the way to church, on the way to, wherever it was. And so as we kind of walk with folks through this process and what it looks like, a lot of times it's denial, because sometimes we don't like to see the negative in ourselves. But we do have those things that sometimes subconsciously we didn't know that was there. If I were to poll and say, how many people have asked for, Lord, I just need more patience, right? Here we are in a pandemic. Here's that opportunity to see what having more patience is like. And so in this process, I offer my humanity and and sometimes personal stories. And we're taught, don't share your personal stories because that can kind of murky. But I want them to be able to identify what it looks like that I'm human just like you are. And I experience hurt just like you do. And so as we walk through these processes, especially where we are now, we want to know and give ourselves grace and be mindful of where we are. Be mindful of the awareness. Be mindful that we're trying to be comfortable in a discomfort at the same time. And oftentimes that's awkward because many times we have distractions. Hey, I got to go to work. Hey, I got to go to my child's game. Hey, I got to go be at church or wherever our congregation is, or whatever those distractions are. But now we have an opportunity and we have to sit with ourselves. And what does that look like? Sometimes it's not a positive experience, right? And so as I told you at the top of my communication, we are now teleworking from home. As part of my advocacy, I work from home. And so I'm still listening to clients, trauma are increased, and the helpline has increased by 14% because people are now home and they're confined and they're saying, now what do I do? My distractions are gone. What do I do? All these things I've kind of put in the closet or in the basement, they're starting to creep up. What do I do? And so in those moments, having to sit with them, and the best gift I feel, and I say this everywhere I go, the best gift I offer people is my ability to listen. Because people, we know this, people don't want to know how much you know, they want to know how much you care. And so in these efforts, I really try to show how much I care in these moments, because I'm trying to demonstrate maybe what it is they need to do for their children. Look at the upside of it, right? You know, I had a comment, my wife would say, I often wonder why you look out the window when we have intense fellowship. Do we know what that is? Right? And so intense fellowship is just arguing. And so she said, I never knew that, but I learned that from the backseat of the car. My parents would have intense fellowship and my mother would look out the window. Right. And so, as we move through these processes, you know, we're always looking for new strategies. We're always looking for new opportunities. And even for myself, I had to learn how to embrace where we are in this pandemic and see what it is that I need to be purged, or see things that I need to move beyond to be a better Chris, right? For those that I serve, those that I love, right? And so, as humans, we need to, we're really looking for room and space to live, and not having that is as the challenge. So many parents are forced to be in new professions that they never went to school for. They're bankers being homeschoolers. There's doctors that are being daycare providers. You know, so we're moving into new territory that we weren't trained for, that we weren't looking for, and we're trying to create normals in those environments. And it's not always comfortable. Right. So, all right. So as we're kind of moving forward, then as Dr. Melissa spoke on even mental health, sometimes we are having to deal with mental health. I have the opportunity to work with a client that has a son or a nephew that has mental health, and by his norm, school is a distraction for him. He's not in school. And so there's now chaos in the home. So what does that look like? How do I handle that? These are the questions that are posed. How do I handle it? What do I say? What do I do? How do I respond to him in these moments? And so being able to help them see where they are first. Secondly, to help them then to be able to give them tools to see how, where the child's perspective is. And so just trying to take a fresh look in this whole process of the COVID-19, and even times even before, and even the future, the unknown of where we're going, is not always addressed, but we're trying to address them as we go. And as we all collectively do this work, I believe it is something that we can collectively help our communities in which we serve in. And so in my closing, I will say this to you. There's a story that was told to me like this. There was a mother and a daughter that went into a store. Oh, there's echo. And the mother was moving through the aisles, and the daughter began to act up and throw a tantrum. And if you heard the story, just smile and, you know, nod as if you hadn't heard it before. And she's moving through the store, and the daughter responds very negatively in the aisles. The mother says, Susie, it's going to be all right. Just calm down. Just calm down. It's going to be all right. They're moving through the store again, another aisle. The daughter's just throwing things off the shelves and just really acting up. Mother says, Susie, everything's going to be all right. Just calm down. We're going to get through it. The daughter continues as going through the store and through the aisles, and they're in the checkout, and she just at her wit's end. Hair's all over the place and all this. And she says, so there's an older woman behind her says, I couldn't help but to just really admire how you handled your daughter in that moment. And she turns to the woman, she says, my name's Susie, her name is Amy. So if we get it, being able to get a hold of ourselves first, then we can be a help to those that need us most. Oftentimes in our training, we use when you're in an airplane, right? And so it said when the oxygen mask dropped from the ceiling, put the mask on who first? Yes, he would say our children, right? And they're the ones that we love. But if we don't care for ourselves, if we don't exhibit self-care, then we can run into some of the challenges. And I just want to leave you with some of the tools that I would like to extend to those that are on, that hopefully that may be helpful. And there's only about 4 or 5 or 6 of them. So minimize your exposure to certain triggers. That can be the news. That can be certain environments. That can be certain people, right? Create boundaries. I'm currently reading a book right now talking about boundaries, right? It's a coursework that I'm in dealing with boundaries. Oftentimes, if we've never had boundaries, now's a great time to create them and to know what they look like, and then teaching our children what they look like. Because if not, then they grow up repeating the cycle of having no boundaries. Time management, time away, right? Oftentimes I go for walks after I get off a tough call, go for walks, clear my head, clear my thoughts, take in the sunshine while we have it here in Chicago. Create new patterns and invite your children in those new patterns, explaining what they are, explaining what they look like. Encourage their input, their ownership, their buy-in process. And most of all, be honest with yourself. Please be honest with yourself and with the kids. Because what I've learned as a youth pastor, they'll know when you're lying. And it makes it hard for them to trust you. Create and do those things you've always wanted to do. Clean out the garage, start a new project, paint a wall, start writing a book, create a business, whatever that is, to kind of help you get in a place of sanity and healing. And again, Dr. Stephanie and those that are on the panel, thank you so much for allowing me to be and contribute my portion of our mental health and our children and our families. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Those were, first of all, I laughed about the piece. No, my name is Susie. The child's name is Ann.
Right.
Love that, the example of speaking to oneself.
That's right.
Before we engage others.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you so much. And also those tips: minimize triggers, or exposure to triggers, creating boundaries, and teaching kids about boundaries. Mm-hmm. New patterns, create new patterns for you to explore. Be honest with yourself and the children, and also do what you've always wanted to do. Do something new. We'll make sure we get those tips up today, along with the presentation from Melissa Merrick. And we're going to now move into a conversation specifically around the spiritual dimensions of care with children and families right now. This is a difficult time that isn't just practically difficult, it is spiritually difficult. All of these pieces that we've been addressing so far also have a spiritual component. So for that, we're going to turn to Reverend Dr. Carmen Frederick James from Covenant UCC.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm saying a test. You guys can hear me, I hope. Thank you guys for being on the panel and inviting me to be on the panel. Dr. Merrick, Mr. Chambliss, Dr. Wilson, and Dr. Crumpton, it is a pleasure to be here with you all and the hundreds I hear that are on the call this day. As we talk about this time of heightened stress in our vulnerable children, many, Dr. Merrick and Mr. Chambliss, have already touched on some of the things I wanted to share. Before we move a little further, I want to share a little bit about my background because it's almost tied into everything that everyone else has said. I began my journey towards working with children who are in heightened stress situations in my 20s while working as a child abuse and neglect caseworker. And I did that for a few years. Again, those are times of heightened stress for families where children are involved in abuse and neglect cases. Following that experience of working with vulnerable children who were in times of heightened stress, I spent about 15 years working as a speech language pathologist. So I worked with children from birth. My primary emphasis were children birth to 3-year-olds, but birth to 21 was about my entire experience. And in that time, I worked with children who had communication delays, disorders, or differences than others. And so someone mentioned the idea of communication. So again, that is a time of heightened stress, not being able to communicate what the needs are of a child. Being able to communicate what their needs are is a time of heightened stress for not only the child, but a time of stress for the family. So I spent about 15 years working with children in the capacity of a speech language pathologist. And then for the past 8 years, I have served as a youth pastor to two large churches in the Chicagoland area. And so I've had the opportunity in my current setting, we have about 700 kids on our list of those who are on the books, but I interact regularly with about about 65 to 100 kids on a weekly basis. I'm sorry, pre-COVID basis. Pre-COVID, I interacted with about 100 kids per week, and almost each week it was a different set of children. So that just offers a bit of background. So again, for the past 8 years, I've been dealing with the spiritual needs of children in particular, but for pretty much my entire life, my calling has been toward dealing with children that have been in heightened stress situations. Of course, there's nothing like this heightened stress of COVID-19. I'm sure that none of us have ever experienced anything like this before. It's certainly an unprecedented time. What I wanted to share from today, since we're talking about spirituality, and I noticed on Dr. Merrick's tree, one of the roots is that of faith. And of course, we know that our faith is rooted in the case of Christians, our faith is rooted in the Holy Bible. So I want to share a passage of scripture that has really been my guide in how I've worked with children who are in these times of heightened stress. And it reads from Isaiah 43, verses 16 through 21. The Message translation in particular, I'll read that one. That's kind of one that the kids hear very well. It's a very practical translation. And this is the passage of scripture. This is what God says, the God who builds a road right through the ocean, who carves a path through the pounding waves, the God who summons horses and chariots and armies. They lie down and then can't get up. They're snuffed out like so many candles. This is my favorite part of this passage. Forget about what's happened. Don't keep going over old history. Be alert, be present. I'm about to do something brand new. It's bursting out. Don't you see it? There it is. I'm making a road through the desert, rivers in the badlands. Wild animals will say thank you, the coyotes and the buzzards, because I provided water in the desert, rivers through the sun-baked earth, drinking water for the people I chose, the people I made especially for myself, a people custom made to praise me. And that is God speaking to Isaiah, the words that God has heard from Isaiah. So that is the word of God for the people of God that has been guiding my time as we prepared together. And if I had a topic to share, the topic would be the ABCs of heightened stress. The ABCs of heightened stress. So when I was a child, one of the things that my father said to me on a regular basis was ABC. And it stood for always be careful. So if I was leaving the house for school, he would say ABC, always be careful. And I think when he said careful, he didn't just mean being cautious or fearful. He meant be careful. That's how he would say it for me, be full of care. So as I grew older and I began to work, if I was traveling, he would always say ABC, always be careful. The one thing that he never said ABC about, which I wish he would have, was relationships. He really didn't. I think he didn't want to talk to his daughter about anything related to relationships. I do, after one divorce, wish he would have said ABC, always be careful, but he did not say always be careful. It's gotten to the point now when we text each other, he says ABC, and we all know what it means. Carmen, to all my siblings, always be careful. Well, during this time of COVID-19, as I have used this passage of scripture as a guide, there has been added meaning to the ABC. Of course, we know we're going to always be careful as we wash our hands and sanitize the groceries we need to bring into our home and wear our face masks for as long or whenever they tell us we're supposed to, not wear gloves because maybe they're not good, but then again, maybe they are good for the gloves. So we know we're going to always be careful. But I want to share with you just a little bit about what the ABC has meant during this time of heightened stress. And I think it's important, as Chris has already said, that this ABC applies to ourselves because we do have to practice the self-care portion. But I want us to also think about how it might be applicable to our children. So the first A is acknowledge, okay? I believe I saw this post on Facebook. I think Dr. Danielle Buhuru posted it, but it was a list of the 7 stages of grief, which I'm guessing they'll probably talk about more next week when we'll talk about COVID grief. But one of the things that we have to acknowledge, if we think about this, is that we are in a period of grief, right? Right? Grief means that we have probably lost some things. And so, if I take just one moment to think about the things that I have lost related to this COVID-19 crisis, the list immediately jumps to 5 things. I've lost my routine. I've lost I haven't gotten in the car in like 4 weeks or something like that, which is an active part. There's so many things that we have lost. So what we want to do during this time is acknowledge that there have been many losses, right? The scripture that I mentioned earlier says, forget about what has happened. We can't forget about it if we don't even acknowledge that it was there. And so I want to encourage us during this time to work with our families, not only thinking about what we have lost as adults, but think about what we have lost, our children have lost. They have lost the safety of what schools bring to them. Some of them have lost the regular meals that the schools offer to them. So there's so many losses that we want to consider during this time of heightened stress, that we want to be careful that we acknowledge that there are losses. One of the things that I have lost, and I actually think that it is a good thing, is I have lost my addiction to hurry, right? So I think about how many times I said to my son as we were getting ready to school, hurry up, we're going to be late. Hurry up, we're going to be late. Hurry up, get out of bed. Hurry up, eat your food. Hurry up, put your clothes on. Hurry up. And now I've lost that word from my vocabulary. There really is no sense of hurry. So when we acknowledge the losses, we may want to think about the losses that may not be such bad losses as well, right? So again, losing this addiction to hurry is not quite a bad thing. And I hope that it's something that actually I can hold on to as we move along. So the A is acknowledge. The B is to be present and be alert. In this time of heightened stress, we really need to focus on how we can be present for our children, actually really how we can be present to ourselves, be present to all that we are experiencing in ourselves, be alert and be present. We have a huge world, at least pre-COVID-19, and I've seen a lot more of it now too, a huge emphasis on this idea of being mindful, right? So that ties into this idea of being present and being alert. How can we during this COVID-19 time be mindful as well? The scripture says to be present and be alert. So maybe there are some ways that we can practice yoga with our children, practice yoga for ourselves, deep belly breathing with our children. I was thinking about this because we talked about historical traumas in the ACEs. In my work for my D-Min, which was about the topic of intimacy and what intimacy means for teenagers, how we can cultivate a genuine intimacy with teens. One of the teenagers in particular, one of the things we talked about was that many of our families have what's called enslaved intimacy, right? Enslaved intimacy. And talking with another colleague, we determined that maybe it's not just enslaved intimacy, it is also dismembered intimacy. So we have dismembered, or, we can no longer remember what intimacy looks like for our families. And so in order that one way that we can be present and be alert is we can be reminded about what intimacy with our families looks like. So this time of COVID-19, maybe we can remind ourselves to play games with each other as a family. Maybe we can remind ourselves, again, as I said earlier, that hurry shouldn't be a part of our regular everyday stress levels. So this time of COVID-19 is a time for us to acknowledge, that's the A. To be present, be alert is the B. And then the C is to connect. So acknowledge, be mindful, be present, be alert. And then the C is to connect. And what I mean mostly as we think about our spiritual selves during this time is I think we need to connect to our emotions, our mental states, and our spirits. How are our spirits feeling during this time? I think about when I was going through my divorce, one of the things I had to do was to take time to intentionally connect to what I was feeling. And so I put it on the calendar. That's kind of the person I am and was. I put it on the calendar. So on Mondays, I was going to connect with how I was feeling. So if I was able, I stayed in the bed just a little bit longer. If I felt like I was sad, then I took the time to cry and release all that I needed to release till the pillow might have been soaking wet. Whatever I needed to do, I needed to connect to how I was feeling. If I was feeling angry, then I punched the pillow so that I could connect to that feeling of anger, because we do know that we cannot suppress just one emotion during this time. So we have to connect to all of what we're feeling during this time so that we don't end up depressed. You know, we need to find ways to express and connect to what we're feeling, or sit with what it is we're feeling. The same is true for joy. If we can find joy in anything that we're doing, the joy and the opportunity to play with our kids, then we need to connect to that joy as well. So if I'm laying in the bed and I need to laugh, or whatever I'm doing, I find a way to connect to the emotion of laughter. So the A is to acknowledge, the B is to be present and be alert, as the scripture says. Forget about what's happened, be alert, be present. I'm about to do it. Let's see the brand new thing that God is doing. That's something else we can connect to, is what the new thing God is doing. So one of the new things that we know God is doing is God is bringing us into two spaces together as families. Now, for children who are more subject to abuse, we do have to find a way to connect them differently, but there could be something new that happens out of this. You know, maybe that parent learns a new strategy so that child is not abused or neglected. So connecting to new things that we can see out of the COVID-19 time. Now, I wish that God would have given me a D, E, F, but really God only gave me one other thing, and that's a G. And that G is for gratitude. If we look back at that passage of scripture, the scripture says the coyotes thank me because God has provided solutions for them. God provided a pathway for them. And so we do, in this time of heightened stress, if there's something that we can find to be grateful for, you know, if it's the fact that it's not snowing today, then we need to be grateful for that. If it is the fact that the sky is blue, then we can be thankful, find some gratitude for that. There's got to be something that we can find gratitude for in this time. I'm grateful for the fact that we can see each other's faces. So we do need to find some ways to have gratitude during this time. In fact, when I think about the fact that COVID-19 is a respiratory disorder, all of us on this call need to find time to be grateful for the last breath that we just took. So I'm hopeful that the ABCs, this idea of acknowledging, this idea of being present and being more alert, and the idea of connecting to ourselves, each other, and then whatever faith tradition we have, this is a great opportunity for us to do that. I've never had as much time to sit in devotion and connect to God as much as I've been able to do during this COVID-19 time. So I hope that you're able to find time to connect as well, and then connect with your children in new and exciting ways during this time, and then be grateful for that. So I thank you guys for the opportunity to share. I hope you find the passage of scripture, Isaiah 43, 18 is my favorite part of that, but I hope you find some spiritual uplift in that passage of scripture as well during this time.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Carmen. We appreciate you. The ABCs: acknowledge, be alert, be present, and connect. We have now come to the point in our call where we can engage our question and answer session. Please, if you have any questions or thoughts that you'd like for the panelists to engage, please go ahead and post those in the chat. I am going to begin with a few questions, some things that came up for me while I was listening. And my first question actually is for Melissa. So I saw the resources that you all have that we can find online at Prevent Child Abuse America. There's a resource page. My question to you is, what are some of the things in particular that you would like to see faith communities do and their response around public health, and in particular around child abuse and neglect? In particular, what can faith communities, what would you like to see? Because you work on the other side, on the nonprofit side, the advocacy side, outside of, but also in relationship with communities of faith. What would you like to see from faith communities in particular?
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, first of all, by show of how many people are on this today, it's clear that this, wanting the best for our kids and our families is already so deep ingrained in your collective mission. So you're already doing so much, and certainly faith leaders, houses of worship really have a role to play in prevention. So I guess for me, it's I'm always struck, and I've recently in my career gotten to know one faith leader in particular who is a pastor of the Shiloh Baptist Church in Trenton, New Jersey. He himself had been a foster youth in South Central LA, and now really has integrated trauma in all of the work at his congregation, and actually invited me and another speaker a couple years ago, where his congregation voted to become a house of worship that was a no-hit zone. So no-hit zones are these things that really say what's appropriate, what is the norm in this space versus, you know, what's not going to be allowed in this space. And it started in children's hospitals many years ago. And anyway, to my knowledge, that church, the Shiloh Baptist Church, is the first no-hit zone. But what I was struck by in this 2-day kind of interfaith community symposium, similar to what you've planned in this kind of series of symposia this month, is that congregation, that community said, these principles are clear and we want to set the tone for our congregation. However, we don't want to call it a no-hit zone because our community, under-resourced community, a community of color, historically Black church, we're told a lot about what not to do. And we want to be strengths-based and be told what to do. So I think that they're working on some language now. Maybe it's the positive parenting zone or whatever. I use that as just one example of what many things that I'm sure you all can come up with that would feel right for your membership and your audience, but really to see that churches and faith communities have always been leaders in rallying supports and giving backpacks before school starts, or having soup kitchens for hungry people with increased needs in communities. But I haven't always heard that faith leaders are saying together we can prevent families from coming into crisis in the first place, right? We can be there to respond after the fact. And of course, that work will always be important. Again, I shared my PhD. I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. I'm used to helping one family at a time kind of navigate and be resilient after trauma. But how do we all collectively, including the faith community, employ some upstream prevention strategies? How do we set norms? How do we set the course for being supportive to our communities before they find themselves in crisis? So I just, really thank you, Stephanie and Barbara and everybody on this call today for really your leadership and even having a symposium like this. I would have loved, and I will love, to attend in person when you do it again. But I think the fact that you pivoted virtually, but not let the moment pass, that you would just say, okay, Zoom and all these, we all have so many things to do, and our dogs and kids and everything are at home. There's a lot of barriers, but that you've taken the moment to really shine a light on how together, collectively, we can assure conditions in which families and children can thrive. They can reach their maximum health and life potential, and that we all understand that they do not have to experience childhood adversity, and certainly not as many adversities as they experience. So I will look to you and for some leadership here, your continued leadership and continued ideas on what the role can be. But I guess for me, it's seeing you as a prevention partner in the first place, not just after the fact.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Melissa. That's amazing. One of the things that I'm really picking up on is the importance of thinking about upstream work, right? And this is kind of moving, this time that we're sharing here is moving us towards upstream work, right? And so there'll be more of the upstream work. At the same time, we also have to balance the reality of downstream realities. Yes. And so I want to switch over to Chris and ask you a question that kind of picks up on something that you mentioned before. There's a tendency in a lot of communities to say that what happens at home stays at home.
Mm-hmm.
And furthermore, for bystanders, that's family business. That's not our household, right?
Right.
And so I think my practical question to you, Chris, is twofold. What do you do if you notice that there's abuse happening to a child? And at the same time, what do you do with the feeling of being afraid or having been told it's family business, right? There's a sense you need to act, but you're maybe in tension or at war in the same time, that there's several messages. That family, or even the fear of what will happen to the children if you act. How do you walk somebody through the reality of being a bystander and their options for action?
Wow, that is a very, very heavy and loaded question, and thank you for presenting that, right? Because I don't know if there is a real easy way, but the approach, well, looking historically in certain communities, we're told what happens in the house stays in the house, which has created secrets, which hasn't created an environment for us to be able to share when we've been exposed to something that is negatively affecting us, which is trauma. And so when we endeavor to do that, so in helping a person walk through this, it's actually walking them down this path of what that would look like if that was your home. What would you want to happen if it was you? How would you feel if someone was looking in and didn't say anything for you? So as we begin to unpack what their feelings are, what they're thinking about, what it looks like, then we can kind of start to address the overreaching question of the bystander feeling, and take an approach of consider yourself as if it was you. As the scriptures say, consider yourself as if it was you, and helping them walk through the process of them not being a bystander in some other capacity, but taking the courage to speak up, to get to someone that is maybe more knowledgeable than themselves, to help them address that weighted moment. So where someone else can be saved or something else can be prevented. As we were talking before, during this time, people are experiencing anniversaries of loss, or they're in homes where they can't get out of them and they're not protected. And so creating and also helping them create a safe space of or an action plan of what that would look like to help them in terms of tools.
Wonderful, wonderful. I love it. And because it is a walk, right? Like you have to come alongside of someone to navigate what is preventing them from acting, and at the same time acknowledging the hesitancy, but prioritizing the care of the persons who are most vulnerable. Thank you so much for
Absolutely.
that. Reverend Carmen, I do have a question with your ABCs. So I am so with you, right, on the connecting with ourselves, connecting with God, connecting with others. I do have I have a tough question because, and I'm asking not for a friend, but for myself. But but I figured I'm probably not the only one who's thinking about this. What happens when we're encouraging people, and I am working through it myself, when we're encouraging people to connect with God, but we're connecting over some really bad stuff, right? So like connecting over the griefs that you're talking about, connecting over the losses, connecting over, like, is it possible to connect with God when you're angry with God or you feel betrayed by God? I think that's like a critical thing, that I'm with you on the connection, but gee, is it hard? So can you say a little bit about that complexity there?
Well, I think that as I was saying, I think if we don't take the time to connect, then we become numb. And so I guess the question becomes, which is the better alternative? Do we walk around not experiencing, which I then think leads to cases of abuse and neglect, because you let those feelings out in inappropriate ways. And so it's okay to tell God that you're mad right now. You know, that's still a point of connection, to be able to say, God, I'm mad right now. God, I don't understand. Are you judging us or punishing us this COVID-19? It's okay to be able to connect in a spirit of honesty with God. God can handle our anger. God can handle our sadness. If we choose not to connect, I think the opposite of not connecting is disconnection. And as Dr. Merrick stated, you know, if we have to be careful during this time of social distancing, that it doesn't become social disconnection. And so that is probably the hardest aspect of the ABCs, quote unquote. But what better time? What else are you going to do while you're sitting at home? No one else is around to see if you want to be literally in your living rooms or kitchen boxing with God about whatever the thing is, or boxing with yourself about whatever the thing is that you're disconnected from. So it is hard. I think that, you know, there are a variety of maybe some practical strategies that you could do to connect. You know, maybe it is, so sometimes it's, for me, it's something simple. Since I have plenty of time to watch television, then I watch a television show that I know is going to make me cry so that I can connect with that emotion of tears. I watch a television show that historically has made me laugh, you know, and if I'm not laughing, then I might ask myself, wait a minute, you know, am I disconnected from the sadness that I'm feeling? And so maybe it's watching a television show that you've not had time to do. Maybe it's coloring a book, you know, using a coloring book so that you can take time to connect to some of your own childhood ways when you know, do you color in the lines or outside the lines, you know, for connecting to some of your historical things. Maybe it's looking at old pictures and that brings up a certain emotion or something like that will help you connect during the time. So maybe a hard thing, but I think it's going to be a valuable time. And we hope we don't have too many opportunities like this where people are staying at home like 80 to 90% of the time. So what other opportunities will be given like this to take the time to learn to connect? So
thank you.
I don't know if that answered your question, but you know.
It's getting us closer. Yeah, because it's a complicated thing, especially when we don't know how long this is going to be. So just trying to figure out how we can stay connected, and also I think also the discomfort of not knowing what it feels like to connect with God in this time, but the willingness to still try to connect, right? Oh, we do have a question that is coming in on our chat line. Any thoughts about how to manage/help very young kids when they don't understand why they can't go play with their kids, when they are actually outside, can see the kids but can't go play with them, or go to grandma and grandpa's house? They're saying that we're hearing a lot of struggles, and so that's for any of the three panelists. But yeah, it is tough. I went to go see my godchildren on Sunday, and like the door opens and she didn't know we were coming, and she runs out the door, and I'm in front of her like, no. You know, it's a tough thing. So can you, any of the three of you all, can you speak to that? Carmen, if you want to begin, and then Melissa and Chris, if you can chime in as well.
I think that is, again, kind of a prime example of where the ABC may come into play. Acknowledge, wow, this is really hard for all of us. You know, it's a loss for us to not be able to connect the way we used to do. And the person that can do that is the parent. You know, we can't necessarily be physically there to say those things, but acknowledge, this is hard for me. I want to see Stephanie too. I want to give her the hug I'm used to giving her. Acknowledge that there's a loss in the midst of it all. And then be present and be alert. Wow, you know, hey, wait a minute. This is making me feel sad. I'm wondering if that makes you feel sad too, or this is making me feel anxious. You know, being present and being alert to how it may be making you feel as the adult, and saying to the child, hey, you know, yeah, I got a whole lot of anxiety about this too. I'm pretty angry. Actually, I'm pretty confused about, you know, what this thing is. There's an emotions wheel that I use sometimes with the kids, and it talks about the four. Well, for the younger kids, I use the 4 core emotions: mad, sad, glad, and scared. To be present and be alert to maybe those 4 feelings and say, hey, are you feeling kind of mad about this, the way we're doing things? Are you feeling kind of scared? You know, what are one of the 4 things that you're feeling? And of course, for the wheel gets more complicated, and there are tons of emotions that we don't even know how to say or express, many of us. I think they say there's some work around the idea that we have maybe 80 emotions that we can express, and the average person can only express like 6 or something like that. And so being aware and being present to the complexity of the emotions your child and you may be feeling, no matter what the age, because I'm guessing that even infants are experiencing it or expressing that emotion in a different way, even now, because they've never been around their parents as much as they've been. I'm used to going to daycare. Hey, what's this all about? So being present to the children. And then that connecting thing, maybe there's something you can connect to from your own childhood. Maybe you can say, hey, you know, I remember when I felt this confused about this thing, or I remember when I felt this angry about this thing that happened in my life. And then connecting to something that child may be feeling. If you can't feel it, you can always say, I can only imagine, connect in the sense of empathy I can only imagine how you're feeling not being able to hug Stephanie, Auntie Stephanie, or Godmommy Stephanie. So those would be my solutions for children as young as, 3 or 4 that understand some of those concepts as well. So again, always acknowledging, being present and being alert, and then connecting in some way to what that child might be experiencing. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I think a common kind of misperception is that we can't talk to young children about experiences, life experiences, lived experiences. And I'm really struck that we are going through this shared collective experience, albeit not all of us are on the same boat in this storm, right? So that's also something to lift up in our conversations. But we have compiled resources on how to talk to young kids. There have been wonderful resources created. PBS has wonderful things on how to talk to young kids. I'm cheating a little because I'm a child psychologist and I've been in this work my entire career. My kids know exactly, when they were little, they maybe understand that what mommy does is she helps parents be the best parents they can be to keep as many kids safe, right? That might be what they understood at 4, and now they can say mommy does violence prevention and she works on policy, right? So obviously our conversations will change depending on development, but I think there's just strong science that we sometimes believe that we can't talk to young kids, but the truth is then if we don't talk, they're creating stories in their own mind about why we as parents are acting the way that we are. And you're right, Stephanie, I think even infants, they can pick up on our anxiety, on our body language, certainly being home now, if we just don't acknowledge what's happening in our world, in our country, and in our own communities and homes, our kids can sometimes even be more anxious about it when they put their own stories in place. I also want to say that CDC has some wonderful resources for disaster preparedness in general for communicating that to young children. There's a Ready Wrigley series, Ready, R-E-A-D-Y. Wrigley is the name of the dog, W-R-I-G-L-E-Y, like Wrigley Field. And there's one on, anticipating hurricanes and the aftermath of hurricanes. There's one on flu season. I would recommend that one. That one's as close to COVID, in terms of just the symptomatology. But there's a whole host of those. So I can provide the links to that as well. And again, on our website, we have resources for how to talk to young children, also how parents can model strategies. I think another important one for parents is, and it goes right along with ABCs and all of this, but I think it's also sometimes we have, especially those of us who are working from home, are used to being multitaskers and such, that we have to have some great new skill at the end of this, or we have to finish that book. And the truth is that can be a little bit too much stress for me right now. So I'm giving myself the grace that, I may need my own time out as a parent. I may need to, everyone's safe in the house, and go sit on my front porch and take a moment, right? I may need to lock myself in the bathroom for that moment. I may need to say, I'm taking an extra long shower, but I'm really just experiencing what I'm experiencing, and not apologizing for that time to our children. It's that mommy needs a moment, right? This is something important. It shows them, it models what it means to be engaged in self-care, to really be engaged in healthy coping strategies. So I just would submit that we need to be as open as it's developmentally appropriate, but it's really developmentally appropriate, very young ages, to describe and give words to these emotions and experiences that our kids and our families are experiencing.
I would like to add just a little bit to what has already been said. As Melissa and Carmen were speaking, I was just thinking about what creatively could I do? I've talked to my child. I've said this is what's going on. I've answered questions to the best of my ability. And so I was thinking, okay, if I was in that moment, if I was that child or that parent, what would I do? And I was thinking, I wrote down, find opportunities to do events, write cards, color something beautiful, take it to the grandparents' house or to the friend's house. We said do, and I may be telling my age here, is it ding dong ditch? Is that right? right? So we'll drop the gift, ring the bell, run back in the car, right? And then we'll get home and use our technology to FaceTime. Did you get what I got you? Did you get, and then be able to share and create those moments and possibly record it. Because now we're creating history. Now we're creating memories to look back on, right? Because our scripture tells us about creating those moments, those monuments, those stones in our community, in our life. And our community is not just those out. Sometimes it's our family community. What that looks like and what we do to present. And that's what I have to say on that. But I was looking at the next question, but I don't want to go ahead of everything.
Can I just add one quick thing? I think that we also want to find some time, and it piggybacks off of what Chris said, this idea of connecting to like the power of creativity and play, even with our younger children. There's nothing wrong with singing the Itsy Bitsy Spider, nothing wrong with, sitting and rolling a ball back and forth during this stressful time. Some way to connect through play is going to be vital during this time. Us adults are having tea parties virtually and paint parties virtually. So we have to find ways to do those same things as little as we need to. I used to use in my speech therapy, I carried a portable DVD player around with me, and there was a video of just fish swimming. And it was the most calming thing ever. If I had a very anxious child, I would just press play on this video and they would sit still. So not quite related to the power of play, but just something simple and calming that you can do with even younger children. Music being one of those major things that we can't get around during this time. Many of us are going to the DJ nice parties because we as adults like the music. The kids, even infants, like the music too.
And I think there's a lot of things that we can do for our communities too. Just in my neighborhood, and again, I'm new to Chicago area and to this new role as well. And so as we are, getting out every day and taking walks, we've seen that people are putting different things in their windows. So for Easter, people put Easter eggs in their windows, and we can go on a virtual, kind of an Easter egg hunt, socially distanced Easter egg hunt. And it just kind of is a lot of that togetherness, that community. I know my kids every day, they're like, let's see if we can find more shamrocks when we were doing it for St. Patty's Day, or, we're going to put pinwheels in people's windows this month for Child Abuse Prevention Month as a symbol of awareness for child abuse and neglect. But those kinds of strategies that we're all getting really creative at how can we do that better. But I think that helps us feel connected. And my son, he's 8 years old in 3rd grade. When we're out on those walks, the friends are inside, Ezra, I see you out there, right? And just this kind of moment to feel like we're not all alone. We're still kind of trying at a distance to be connected to our friend groups, our peer groups, certainly FaceTime and Zoom and YouTube and all these things that our kids are able to connect virtually if we have the means, I think are powerful tools in this time to just say, we're going to be okay and still have some of that normalcy that we're able to retain.
And I do want to raise one piece. Heretofore, the recommendations, by the way, have been amazing. And I, as an adult, am interested in several of them. I may roll the ball myself on the floor. And I also want us to not also forget also our teens, right? So, because a lot of our comments have been kind of focused on things that would be for younger children, which adults are easy to go back to the younger childhood thing. But teens and, preteens, they're in that age where they're not trying to roll the ball, but they also don't have the capacity to kind of reason and cope in the way that adults do. Do you all have any suggestions for kids who are not that, real small age, but are preteens and teens? Because what we're also recognizing is that this is a generation that preteens age, they grew up in the kind of social media age, and it's creating a kind of, and it's interesting that some adults will say that because they're so engaged in social media, then it shouldn't be a problem for them not to be home because they're always on their devices. But that's not actually true, right? So can you all speak a little bit, anyone, jump right in, all three, whoever,
Sure.
To kind of talk about teens. Go ahead, Chris.
So I'll just be very brief. So one thing that I discovered with then my teen daughter, whose birthday is today, thank you. She is now 21, and I'm a blended family. So when we came together, I noticed that when I gave her one-on-one attention,
the phone never came up. She was never on her phone. And so I think most times they may desire, never communicate, that they want that one-on-one attention. And so I took from that, it says, okay, so what does that look like? So all the children I have, so how do they individually need, and what do they need from me, and what can I offer? And sometimes coming into their world, invited, can be a very positive, impactful thing, but also in addition to that is consistency. If you're doing it just for COVID-19, we're going to lose on the back end. But if we're doing it to be consistent, because they look for the consistency in that, then they'll stay with us longer. Then we'll have meaningful relationships. We'll have meaningful thoughts, meaningful walks, and all these other things. So I'll step back.
Yeah. I have a teenager at home, a freshman in high school. And so one of the things that I have learned to do with him is just a quick check-in. We of course have talked about the emotion wheel, so I'll actually ask him, what, we're checking in on the scale of 1 to 5, how you feeling about this. So 1, I think, is checking in as well. I've actually asked him some of those same questions that I mentioned. What do you feel like you've lost during this time? What do you feel like, some new things that you're present to, or feelings that you haven't felt before? And then how can we connect? One of the ways that I connect with my teenager in particular is we have a card game that we like to play. And we've actually been baking together and cooking together, but it's all been at his direction. I still have boundaries, as was mentioned earlier, in the sense of you still have to get up at 8, you can't sleep till noon. So I still kind of set the disciplinary boundaries, things that need to be in place. Because that, I think, as we mentioned, the idea of consistency, that stakes for consistency. You're always going to have a school schedule until you're not in school anymore. So the idea of consistency is important, inviting them into something that they enjoy doing. And as the pastor to youth, I actually do focus on our teens as well. And so we have been having teen check-in time, and it's set according to sort of their schedule. And so that I can keep it consistency. At one point I was like, we should do this every week. We should do this every week. And I asked them, that's an important part of this, is what is their input? How often do you guys want to meet? And their response was pretty much, maybe every 10 to 14 days, but not always on the same day, because that just doesn't really work for me. I don't know what I'm going to be doing. So, okay, so we can do something every 10 to 14 days. And so I'll send out a note the day before, and that's what we do. We check in virtually through Zoom as well. So you can, I think, check in with the teens. You can still continue to set boundaries for the teens, find out what is playful for them. My son plays video games, and it's just not something that I don't have a huge interest in it. So we have found something that works for us mutually. And then I've also I think it was Wayne Brady on television. I've not assumed that I can just now jump into his schedule because he has all this free time. So I think we also have to not make assumptions. I could be like, oh, let's go for a walk. He's like, well, no, Mom, that's just not, what I want to do. So I can't impose myself on his schedule as well. So those would be some initial recommendations. Oh, the final thing is our teens at our church in particular had just gone through a mental fitness program with a woman who, she calls herself a mental fitness guru. Her name is Erica Kendrick, and she has maintained contact with our children as well. She's actually presenting a workshop for teens today it's through Governor State, a student-to-student exchange. So I invited all of the teenagers I know to attend that mental health session. And then for the sense of normalcy, I've also been inviting them to financial aid workshops about college, virtual financial HBCU tours, so that they continue to maintain some level of normalcy as whatever. We also have a group chat, so I'm able to keep in touch with the teenagers through our group chat as well. So I still connect with them.
And I agree with everything that's been shared too. I think it's really important to see what they're interested in. So if it's baking, if it's art, providing our teens with a different outlet than our younger kids is important. But I think it's also really important for us as adults to remember that our teens their brains are not fully developed, right? So this impulse control, executive function part of the brain is still developing well into our 20s. So I think some parents that I've heard from of teenagers are sort of like, come on, why aren't they getting it? Why aren't they getting that they need to stay home and they can't go ride their bikes with everybody in their neighborhood or or congregate in the bleachers of the field that's close by. And it's like, well, because that's not what they're supposed to be able to do and think about. That's a fully developed brain, and many of us still are struggling with that. So I think it's just important to know that our teens do need some extra coaxing, if you will, and that's normal. It's not that they're trying to, disregard public health, or that they're really trying to spread the pandemic, or, we don't want to villainize our teens either. We have to understand that their struggles are real, but that they are a part of development where they still, even though they think they know everything, they don't fully understand everything that's going on. So it is still up to us to figure out how to reach them where they are, that it's still important for us to help them think about what they've lost in this time, what they're going through, what their emotions are, what they're feeling about going to college, right? Our seniors in particular are very hard hit right now, and not knowing what's going to happen. Are they going to have a graduation ceremony? Are they going to be able to leave and go on campus? Are they going to be virtually learning? There's a lot of layers here. So we just want to remember that we are still their parents or adults, supportive adults in their communities that can help translate this kind of confusing stuff for our teens as well.
Yeah. One final thing, I think most of us probably know our teenagers in some form or fashion. We kind of know who they are. You may want to think about whether your child was naturally an introvert already anyway, or naturally an extrovert too, as to how you do choose to interact with them. So my son is naturally an introvert. So right now he's just like loving the fact that we're not hurrying around doing all this other stuff with other people. But I recognize that if I had a naturally extroverted child, then we may have a different story about how we would meet that child's needs. So really being in tune to, or connecting to the character, of your child already pre-COVID-19, and then moving, to how can I be the support person for this child that I already know is an introvert, or be the support person for this child that I know is an extrovert, or the person, so kind of weighing the difference, because I think each type of teen, just as each type of adult, might handle this differently. So just something to consider as well. So.
Yeah, I want to shift our attention just slightly to focus on a thing I think is pretty important, because we have about, we're getting close to time. And I think this is a piece that I don't want us to get past around parents. Chris, you did a really great job around raising the importance of checking in with oneself. And I've heard it in all three of you all, Melissa and Carmen as well. But I want to be specific around this one piece, right? Chris, can you talk a little bit about, or speak to parents, some of whom may be essential workers, but not always, but especially our essential workers. I'm noticing that they want to be home, but they can't, or, there may be a lot going on there. So I'm thinking about our parents that have the stress of not having a choice about not being home, and what does that create in the home, as well as what does that create in them. And also alongside of that, parents who have either before COVID, had a mental health condition, or as a result of dealing with the stressors of being a parent or a guardian, right, during this time, knowing that something is happening, and then kind of being in this tension between what you want to do, but some of the messages, either A, you can't take care of yourself in the way that your children the way you want to because you're an essential worker, or B, maybe you perhaps could, but you're also dealing with a competing message of faith, right? That faith is saying that you should have enough faith to be able to not succumb to depression and anxiety. So there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to take care of your kids, when that simply is not true, right? Anxiety and depression and mental health challenges are true barriers to mental health and to parenting. And it's not because people want to be struggling with their mental health, but there are ways in which we have what I would consider some less than helpful messaging in our faith traditions that would prevent us from accessing the resources that would help us be better people, better humans, more effective parents and guardians.
Wow, I think I was just going to take my name and put it on top of what you just said, because everything I was going to respond to, I'm living it. I'm living it. And what that means is allow me 15 to 20 seconds just to expound just a bit and then leave room for the other cohort that's on with me. So let me flip the script just a little bit. So I have a sister who's divorced, who is now a caregiver for my parents, who are respectively 91 and 81, and she's a flight attendant.
Mhm.
And so for her, the anxiety for her is heightened because I don't want to bring anything home to volatile my parents because I don't know how I'll respond, how I'll feel. So that has its own set of anxieties, if you will. And so what I can offer to parents is, and so what ended up having to happen was she had to come stay with me for a period of time.
Mhm.
Right? I could have been exposed or anything like that, but having that weigh on her, not being in her space, not being in her environment, not being able to care for our parents was very, very tough for her. And I had to see physically and feel emotionally her anxiety. And at points felt helpless. Sometimes as parents and or siblings, we can feel helpless. But trying to find that way, trying to find the faith, because my father would say, nope, we just have faith. He's a former pastor. Nope, I have faith in God. You're going to be all right. Girl, come on home. Well, not taking into account how she was feeling as a child. Right. And so oftentimes it's really a tough play because it is important, how we balance our faith and not be foolish. And so taking into account these dynamics is very, very important. So thank you for allowing me to expound on that a little bit.
I think one of the things that we've been doing as a congregation is we've been making wellness phone calls to those in our congregation. And so each week I probably call about 20 people or maybe 25, and we've divided amongst the pastoral team. And so those are some of the questions that I'm getting is, well, why, if we have faith, why aren't we just going outside and trusting that we'll be safe, especially early on in the COVID-19 crisis? And some of my responses were one of the old phrases, which was trust God, but lock your door. We live in the city of Chicago. Well, most of us in the city of Chicago, where violence and theft. I mean, I regularly, if I accidentally leave my car unlocked, then I can wake up and find items missing because someone has opened the door and gone in and took something that doesn't belong to them. So that's, to me, a perfect example. I'm trusting God that God will keep everything safe, but I'm still going to lock my car door so nobody else breaks into it. And so in this COVID-19, I think the message of faith that I'm sharing is trust God, but wear your gloves. Trust God, but wear your mask. Trust God, but stay at home. And then I think we're seeing, public examples of what happens, when we have not trusted God, but locked our door. Meaning some pastors that have succumbed because they believe, that their faith would get them through it all. So I think it's just a growing understanding that faith is a process too. So faith is not you have this amount of faith today and that faith is going to get you through till, the end. We have to keep developing different aspects of what our faith means to us. One of the things that we may be developing now is learning that God, as this passage of scripture said, God will make a way out of no way. And that's one aspect of faith. We have to wait and see that. But until then, we're trusting God, but locking our door in so many words. So I'm unmuting.
Stephanie, you are muted.
Thank you. I was just talking. I said, we are nearing completion of our call. We have a few minutes left. I want to make one comment and then I'll invite our panelists to leave a parting thought. And then we'll close out with my co-convener with some final announcements. The one comment that I do want to offer related to the last comment, quite honestly, most people know that I teach pastoral care at McCormick, and mental health is a serious component of our work, and quite honestly, as far as I'm concerned, is our faith. And so we trust God and we lock our doors, but we also need to trust God for the healers that God sends in the form of the therapist, in the form of the psychiatrist. If you need psychotropic, psychiatric support, maybe the blessing is in the pill that allows you to have the balance, right? So that you can hear from God clearly, and so that you can also hear your children and you can hear yourself and have much more space to respond as opposed to only reacting. And so I think that's a pretty important piece. And I offer that as a clergy person to consider that getting help, the help that God is raising up through healers and supporters, is a work of God. And allowing yourself to be available to that help is the work of God, right? So I just want to offer that. With that, I'll turn things over for a quick final word from our presenters. I'm going to ask Chris to go first, followed by Melissa, and then Carmen, and then we will have our closing thoughts from my co-convener, Reverend Dr. Barbara Wilson.
Thank you again so much for this opportunity, Dr. Stephanie and Dr. Barbara, and even those that were presenting with me today, Dr. Carmen and Dr. Melissa. I will say this in parting, if we will, those that experience our faith and exercise our faith, just allow ourselves to see Christ in the crisis. See Christ in the crisis. Remember that we're human and that we have a human experience. And if we allow ourselves to be human and allow God to carry us through this process, we can be so much better on the other end. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
I would just say thank you again for all of you for being so engaged and staying with us and pivoting to this virtual implementation. It's so important, the work that we can all do together to prevent child abuse and neglect and to really make our children and families and communities stronger, thriving, healthier, and really for the next generation too. So the work starts now, but it continues for our children and our children's children. So thank you. And thanks to all the messages, private messages you've been sending me. Please email me. I'm happy to connect with all of you. Thanks very much.
Just a quick comment related to the mental health. I think the city of Chicago also set up a text line for those who may not be able to physically get to actual texting, and the number is 552020, and you text the word TALK, T-A-L-K, to 552020. And of course, we know that the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is 800-273, oh, I can't see, there we go, 8255, it just kind of left me. So, for the parents involved, please take time, as Dr. Stephanie mentioned, and I think all of us are supporting whatever you need to do to take care of your mental health. If you need to talk to somebody, do that via text, do that via calling someone, create a support squad for yourself so that you can manage your own mental health. And then I think for the sake of our children, again, I hope that we are all able to kind of, I think in this moment, we do have to forget about what has happened in our past, because we are looking towards something certainly very new that we've never experienced it before, and that we should be present and be alert, and then connect to some of the new things that are happening, as is stated in Isaiah 43. So I hope that you're able to practice some of the ABCs, and thank you guys each for sharing this time with each of us. Thank you, Chris, and Melissa, and Stephanie, and Miss Barbara for the invitation as well.
All right, friends, we have come almost to the close of our time today. Just want to say one thing and then give us a quick announcement. From last week to this week, we've heard some similar things as it relates to trauma healing, the emphasis on self-care and knowing oneself and building healthier relationships. This has been phenomenal. We are to be proactive. We are to connect and be grateful as we do this. We are human. Now, next week, April 23rd, our topic is COVID Grief is Different. And we will have with us for the education piece, the Reverend Wanda Jenkins, who is a spiritual director and bereavement coordinator for Vitas Healthcare Hospice. We will have for a practical presentation of a model available for congregations and communities from Pastor Chris Harris, Bright Star Community Church. This is a model for communal grief support. And then we will have a presentation on spirituality in terms of rituals for grief. And this is Idahari Toure. I pray I said it correctly. Forgive me if I did not. Thank you so much. It has been phenomenal. And we will post all of the resources, the presentations, in about a week or so on both McCormick Seminary's website and Chicago Presbytery's website. Stephanie?
Yeah, and for those who are interested, in viewing the video from last week about COVID and mental health. It is up and available, as well as the resources that were shared during the call. They are available for download as well. So go ahead over to the McCormick Theological Seminary website. There is a graphic and a tab for the Trauma Symposium. That is where all of the video recordings and any resources will be posted. Again, give us about a week, as Reverend Barbara just said, give us about a week to get this one up. We have about a week worth of lag time between the webinars. So thank you very much for our panelists. Thank you so much for those of you who have joined us from all over. We appreciate your time and energy. We look forward to seeing you all next week. Take care and God bless you all.